Hello, everyone, and welcome. Is this Rijk and Kevin's game table or Kevin and Rike's game table? Don't
No,
remember. Welcome to the first
Kevin
one.
came first.
Oh, thank you very much. It's not because I wanted you to say it. I really didn't know that. Um, this is going to be a monthly show with the two of us. Rike is CTO and co-founder and lead maintainer of the Directus project.
You know it.
Yeah, I do, boss. My name's Kevin. I run developer relations here at Directus, and we've had a ton of questions from the community that are a little more technical. We have community question time, which we do every few months about the company, where we invite you to ask questions. This one's a little more scoped into engineering and engineering culture here at Directus. So we thought it would be fun to play a game. I have the upper hand because I know this game and Reich doesn't. But we we have a little format here that we're going to try and follow, and we'll see. So firstly, I want to introduce you to this game. This is Ticket to Ride. Let me explain how it works. We are
Mhm.
trying to secure train routes here over the US. The way we do it every turn is by either taking some of these coloured trains over on the side and they get added to our hand. We've started with a few, so your hand is like at the bottom of the screen right now. So you can
Mhm.
take two, any two, unless they're rainbow coloured, which are wild cards, then you can only take one. So the first thing you can do is take these trains. The second thing you can do is um, is place trains onto the board. So you'll notice all of these like rectangles. This represents a route, and you need to place
Mhm.
down all of the parts in that route in one go. Right. So if I was to go from Vancouver to Seattle in the top left, I only need to place one train in, any color because it's grey. Forget the fact there are two next to each other. They don't happen in a two-player game. If I wanted to go from Portland to San Francisco, I'd need five pinks or five greens, all five. Or the wild cards can be any color. Place those down. You get points for those. All we care about is points. The final thing you can do is draw new routes. You'll notice at the bottom of the screen, I think you'll have it now. You have like three routes that show you two locations. And if you connect those locations, you get that many points. And if you fail at the end of the game, they're negative points. So the third thing you can do is draw new routes. So I think you draw three and you have to pick at least one. So you're bound at that point to take at least one. And finally, at the end of the game, longest route, longest continuous set of trains is worth 10 points. Make sense?
Mostly. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, we start with 45 cars, and I think the end game
45.
is when one player has like three or less, like it triggers the last round or something like that. We'll figure that out. First thing we do is we pick the routes. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to pick a. So you have to again pick at least one, and any you don't pick get discarded, and you don't have them. So I picked mine.
I'm very much just getting everything you just told me again in
Okay.
tutorial form.
So, oh, are you
Right.
doing the
So I'm
tutorial?
gonna pick a route.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Pick.
And you can pick more than once if there are two that kind of look like they're going to and from the same place. Like it's worth doing that because you can complete both of them using fewer trains, right?
Very clever. All right,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
here we
So
go.
while we do this, so we'll volley turns while we do questions. Let's kick this off with just a little bit of an update, I guess. So I'd kind of be interested in what's new in Directus engineering land, what's being worked on, anything kind of interesting.
Yeah, loads of things. Loads and loads and loads and loads of things. Um, I think the biggest ones in the last, month and a half or something like that, it's been mostly stability updates across the board. So we have an updated, file storage backend to make sure that, streaming files is a hell of a lot more efficient when it comes to, generating assets, but also streaming files to from the storage adapters. Also, having most of the work in place there to make those an extension type, so you can start building, your
Yeah,
own
cool.
file storage adapters, being if you want to connect to a NAS or you want to do some like specialized, storage thing. Other than that, I mean, we did sort of bite the bullet and upgrade everything to Note 18, which is always, every other year. It's a fun experiment. And can we
Hmm.
drop support for, whatever the oldest LTS is and make it up to date?
Before you continue, take your turn. What generally
Second
happens at the
turn.
start of this game is you amass cards, and then at a point when you can start to place routes, we start to like mix up what we're doing. So just a
Uh-huh.
reminder, you can take any one of the face up ones, or you can tap the deck, which I forgot to say, and you get a random one. right? If you don't like
Oh,
those. And that could be a rainbow, which means you then get a second card that turn, right?
maybe.
If you pick one of those 5, it gets immediately replenished. So take a
What
look
about
at
the what about the gray
your.
one?
So the grey ones on the board are any, but they all have to be the same.
Any if they're all the same. Okay, can do. One of those, please. One of those, please.
Excellent. And we'll volley this while we go. So sorry, you were talking about upgrading to the
Yeah.
latest
Oh, all good.
BTS.
Learn by doing, as we all do with Directus anyways. Um, yeah, so I think that's basically the biggest deal. So other than that, a lot of updates around the overall stability is always, an ongoing effort to make sure that we have things as stable as we can possibly get them. Right? There will always be some issues as long as we keep introducing new features, which we're obviously planning on doing. There will be regressions every now and again, so we want to make sure that we keep things as stable as we can. So the last month was really around that. We did launch, one big new thing though, which is sort of the schema migration endpoints. So before in the CLI, we had some commands where you could make a snapshot of your. Ooh, look at that. We had to see a library to make, a snapshot of. There you go. Snapshot of your schema, so you can then import it elsewhere, right? And we made now we turned it into a set of API endpoints as well. So it's at the core, sort of the foundation of it. It's a very similar idea, but the big change for that API endpoint is also that it does partial updates, right? So instead of applying the whole thing, you can also do a partial import of a schema, which opens up quite a bit of use cases for moving from different environments, or making backups for um, shared work in a team and stuff like that.
I feel like we have our set of questions for today, and I want to get through them. But I am interested in the implementation side of partial updates.
Mm.
There are lots of ways that can be done, but we'll save that one for next time. Um, was there anything else in update land?
I think those are the big pieces, honestly. Yeah.
Nice. Oh, it's my turn. Sorry. Um, I'm going to do this. So the more trains you do in one go, the more points you get. So it scales up, right? As you may have noticed, you put down a 3 and you got 4 points, but for two I only got 2. So the longer they are, the more immediate points you get as well as the routes. Let's move on to the second part of this, where every time we do this, I want to just pick a topic ahead of time, and we'll take some time talking about engineering or engineering culture at Directus, and kind of how you and we collectively make that happen. And today I wanted to talk a bit about balancing priorities is the theme. And there are so many places that I observe, at least as not a member of the engineering team, that we have to very carefully balance what we do. We have
Mm.
Directus Core, the open source project that everything is based on, that we care very much about. We also have Directus Cloud, not only the act of building and maintaining cloud, but some features that only exist in that space. Maintenance versus new developments and so on. So while we continue to volley our turns, let's talk a bit about balancing priorities.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when it comes to balancing, you mentioned cloud versus core. I think it's important there to note that we have a balance in that we're basically have dedicated people working on both simultaneously. So we're luckily never in a position where it's like, oh, for the next month or so we have to just stop work on the core platform or stop work on the cloud platform completely in favor of doing the other thing. So that has always been a very nice sort of position to be in, that we get to work on both things, and moving both things forward at the same time. When it comes to new features versus bugs, that's a discussion
I
that's a
said
whole different.
maintenance, bug fixes, I suppose. There's also general maintenance, right? Or paying off any tech debt that might ever be accrued.
That's very true. I mean, that is always a. I mean, I don't want to call it tricky necessarily, but it's one of those things where you have to balance between things that are fun to do and things that you have to do, right?
Mm,
Sometimes. So it's like it really honestly just depends on what comes up at any given time. So it sometimes happens that bugs show up that affect so many people that it's like, okay,
Hmm.
we have to take this seriously, and we're going to take it seriously, and we're going to prioritize this right away, basically, in order to get it out the door and make sure that everybody that was running into it and has reported it in the past can sort of breathe, and knowing that it's resolved, right? So it oftentimes depends on severity and sort of longer term planning what we want to be working on. That being said, we do try to have sort of one bigger thing in the works at all times as well. So it's not like, even if we have a window like the last month where we just really want to focus on overall stability and stuff, we still have people dedicated on um, making sure that we move some of these bigger pieces forwards at the same time as well. So that's always a fun balancing act, which is just,
Yeah.
it's case by case that it's tricky to, tricky to
I've
really
got
quantify.
maybe I've got maybe an interesting follow-up that is like a little divergent from what we spoke about. So you're hearing this question for the first time. I know in
Ooh.
some open source projects that have like a company that support them, there's there's always controversy in developer land, but pushing features into core open source projects because they benefit the extra things you're building that aren't open source. And I wondered if like maybe we've just never reached the point where this is ever flagged. I can't think of one in my time here at least. Is this something that you have? A stance is a little bit like, yeah, I'm not trying to get you to say anything controversial, but like, have you got any thoughts about this as it pertains to us?
Um, yes, it's a very good question. I think at the end of the day, I mean, we, it's, it, Directus, it's the whole goal of it is to be helpful, right? So we're trying to make
Mm,
sure that we can help as many people as we can in as many ways that we can, while also making sure that we, make enough revenue in order to support the whole operation. So when it comes to making updates to the sort of core software in order to help um, the sort of revenue generating side of the business, I mean, we've made the decision early on to really heavily focus on extensions as being sort of the differentiating factor there. And the nice thing about that is that whatever work we do on extensions also inherently helps everybody else making extensions. So it's like we're trying to keep that as open of a, it's almost like a competitive landscape almost, right? Where we're just trying to keep that as open as we can and saying like, oh, you know what, we make some, premium extensions, so to speak, and we distribute those through like paid means. But in order to make extensions as a whole better, to support that, we help everybody else at the same time still, right? So I don't think we've ever gotten to a point in core, or we've no reason to get to that point at this point, at least, that we have to make a difficult decision there, where we're like, we're going to totally overhaul what we're doing in core just to facilitate one of those things for
yeah, I
a paid.
suppose it doesn't make sense. I suppose the most we would do in that regard is create a new extension type. Then
Extension
everyone
type.
can build a new
Yeah.
extension type. Yeah, that's really interesting, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I just wanted to throw that into the mix.
Yeah.
Bit of spice
And
around
other than
there.
that, I also, we do try to make sure that we don't make anything too locked down, so to speak, because it's like the
Hmm.
last thing we want to do is just really put people behind a paywall or something like that, right? Where it's like, oh, you can get a little taste, but you can't get the whole meal. It's just that sort of thing. It's not
I'm
really.
hungry. Also, oh my God, these 5 cards that are out are trash. Like, I just keep
Yeah,
taking the ones from the deck. Like, I'm waiting for specific. Oh, you're still going. I'm waiting for specific
I
cards
got
to
two
rear
good
their
ones from
head.
the deck, though. I'm not gonna lie, that was a nice.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I have 4 rainbows, but I'm trying to save them.
Oh,
And it's like, that was okay. This is people watching with my screen from this is the color I'm after. But yeah,
yeah,
I can
yeah.
I
They
can do
can't see
that
what
now.
I'm doing.
They
That's
can't
very
see
true.
what you're doing now.
That was a
In
terrible job.
fact, thank you very much. I'm going to place that there. I was waiting for the reds. Okay.
Ooh, not a
Yeah.
fan.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I'm not sure if you've seen in your map, but like the green dots are like some of your termini, terminuses, terminus. It might even be same plural. I'll edit that in with a ding. Um, And then the card you've got selected in the bottom left shows you the points, and you can flip between those. And yeah, I expected more routes to be coming out soon. If you accept a notification, you can take a break while waiting for him. Your
What just
opponent is
happened?
away for a moment, apparently.
Where am I?
Did you?
What is going on?
Did you? I, I don't know.
Hold that thought. Hold that thought. It just
I'm
froze at
holding
me.
it. Okay,
Hold
that's
it.
fine. I'm waiting.
Hold
I'm
it.
waiting.
Hold
I'm
it.
waiting.
Okay, we're good.
We're good. Okay. I
Ooh.
mean, because
Maybe I was
this,
just losing and just trying to get out of it,
I,
but
I did consider this because this client supports async play. Even if you left and came back, it would resume, which is quite nice.
yeah,
Mm,
I pressed the wrong
yeah.
button. I need to live with the consequences. That's not great.
Oh, you picked the wrong routes. Now you got to make them happen.
No, I meant I clicked on the wrong cart in the right-hand side, and now I have to choose a new
Oh, you
route.
have to choose them, and you have to. And if you don't do them, you get negative points. So like,
Oh man, I
yeah, yeah,
just
yeah. Like the score on them, it gets deducted from your score. Yeah, you currently have 14 points. I have 15. You have 33 trains, and so do I. That's you
oh
can see
man.
that. Yeah, and so there's a little while left, but this client also lets you pick playtime. So I picked 45 minutes, which is roughly how long we wanted to record for. As long as you don't
Right.
keep leaving the game where it pauses, it's
So
fine.
it sounds like you're just buying yourself some time right now. So let's get on it. Let's get on
Yeah, all
it.
right, all right, all right. I'm going to. Oh, it's my turn, isn't it? Yeah, no, that's fine. Here, there you go.
Anyways, what we're talking about, Ben Center. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, no, we were talking about, well, yeah, we were talking about like, I threw out there the thing about like, would we ever kind of introduce something into core for the sake of cloud? And really, no, just because of the extensible way in which it's built, which is, yeah, good, cool. Is there anywhere else around balancing priorities which is interesting? I mean, I'm interested in because there's this third part. So, we spoke about core and we spoke about cloud and cloud extensions and cloud infrastructure and all of this. There's this third part, which is where we have companies come to us asking us to basically build stuff for them, where it
Right.
impacts positively enough of our users. We encourage or contractually build in that goes into core so everyone can use it. But sometimes that isn't the case in both of those scenarios, how do you balance those? Because we're still a small team, right?
Oh, that's a great question.
How do
Yeah.
you balance those against core and cloud and kind of let's call them business as usual activities?
So normally when it comes to I'll assume new features. That's a little easier to reason about when it comes to this topic.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So normally we balance the new features based on sort of popularity, right? Sort of what we get back from the community and sort of our end users to figure out, okay, what is the next thing to focus on? And in those cases, we also do rely on sort of what we internally call that 80-20 thing, where it's like, oh, if it's relevant enough for 80% or more of the use cases that Directus sort of helps, then it's something that we're sort of willing to sort of take up and implement
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, right? So normally, if you look at the priorities, it becomes fairly easy. You just look at what's popular, what's reasonably doable in a reasonable amount of time, and then do it, right? Um, when a client shows up with a potential enhancement, it's kind of going through the same process where we have to determine like, okay, what does it mean for the bigger use cases? Like, is it relevant for everybody, or is it just hyper specific? And we also do say no at times for those particular reasons, where it's like, if it's too niche, we do have to sort of live with the consequences of that. We have to maintain it over time as well. So it's
Yeah.
not like it's not a one-time implementation. It's the longevity of for the rest of its life. We have to maintain it. So it's a very similar process, and we want to make sure that it's worth doing for the project's sake. And then at that point, it becomes a balancing act of like, okay, you start to discuss potential timelines and the scope and exactly, how much time it would take to implement it, how high it was on our own priority list, and you sort of come up with, a statement of work basically to figure out
Mm.
what can we do when to get that out the door. So it's a fairly similar process, honestly.
Interesting. Yeah, it's just I think this question is about like how do you balance people's time where there is never enough time in the day, right? But yeah, glad I'm not you figuring that question out. Uh, anything else around balancing priorities that you can think of? Uh, I'm sure community members watching. If you have more specific questions around this, ask them, and they'll
For
get thrown
sure.
into the third section, which is like Kevin beats Rijk in the board game. But it's also the part where we answer some of your questions. So there are a few places you can ask questions. I mean, to be honest, you can throw them to us, and anywhere we see them is valid, and we'll collate them. But there are some common places. There's a GitHub discussions thread where we ask you to ask us questions about the company, and where they're more technical, they're more likely to turn up here, and where they're less technical or about the company overall, bigger picture things, we'll put them into community question time, which runs every few months. If you want to remain anonymous, there's a form you can fill in, which is linked in all of these places I'm mentioning. Um, I mean, this is it. These are the main two places, but you can also throw them in our Discord server. You can fire them over to us in Twitter and DM or by mentioning us. And we'll collate these. And as we run this session, which I think we're going to try and do this monthly, um, then yeah, they'll pop up. So some of these questions were asked. Some are mine as kind of scene setting questions for the more specific questions that community members ask. So let's kick off with talking about flows for Directus. So people who don't know what flows are, it's basically an automation flow builder where you have a trigger and a set of actions that happen when that trigger is met. It has a visual interface. You can also write code in some of these actions, which is pretty cool. They can interact with the database, but also go externally. And so with that in mind, I'd like to know about the collective we watching and me are interested in just flows as a project. Like, what was the conception of it? Why did you decide to work on it? How did you implement it? Any interesting like maintenance or scaling challenges with it? And then I have the very specific question that was asked, but these are all kind of
Yeah.
interesting too.
Great question. So from the start, I think the idea to implement it came from seeing what people were doing in extensions, funnily enough, where we noticed that the hook extensions in particular were used very often for very repetitive things. So we saw the same hook fly by and the same questions around some of those hooks come by over and over again, where it was like,
What's a hook? Just for
so
those
a
who
hook
don't know.
is one of the extension types that it's now very similar to flows, where you basically you write a bit of JavaScript and you tell it to fire whenever a certain event happens, right? So you can say whenever an item is saved to the database, do X, right? And we saw a couple of very common use cases, repeatedly, where it was like, oh, some people want to modify the data before it's being saved, or they want to, after it's being saved, they want to make a certain copy in a certain format and then send it off to a third-party service for translations or other use cases like that. But it was very often just that sort of that read the data, transform it, and then do something with it approach to it. And at a certain point, we were just sort of brainstorming on like, what can we do to make that part a little easier because people are reinventing the wheel, over and over again. And flows kind of came out of that.
Cool.
Plus 2 points. Look at that.
Yeah, good story there. Don't forget to take your turn. Oh yeah, you did. Oh,
Ta-da.
okay. You've got 26 points. I've got 19, and I don't like that.
I just finished one of the routes. That's why I did a bit of a dramatic
Ah,
reveal.
don't worry. I'm
Um,
coming for you. I'm coming for you. All right.
so
Before we move
anyways,
into
just
like,
bringing it back up there. So this is where it came from. So
yeah.
the initial idea for Flow is like, oh, what if you could just configure the trigger point that you would normally do in code as from the UI, and then we can provide little building blocks that you can just chain together to basically visually create one of these extensions, right? It used to be extensions, or there still are, but for power users,
Mm-hmm.
And then it was a matter of getting to work and figuring out like what are the types of operations that people do and have to do and want to do and do often that we can sort of do in advance, so to speak. Damn. Okay. All right. I see how it is. Yeah. So that's really where that came from. Um, and then in terms of implementation and challenges, I mean, yes, it's
Before you move on to implementation, I'm curious, is the version of flows that people see today in like early 2023, was this the version that was launched? Did it look like this at the start, or were there earlier no, this is the initial release. Nice. Cool. Sorry, I interrupted you.
yeah,
Yeah, around implementation.
yeah, no, this is the initial release, and it is there's loads of tricky bits. Tricky bits, the flows that we saw coming, and some of them we didn't see coming. In especially when it comes to it's because it's so powerful in that you can basically do whatever, because you have an event, which is any of the events, or now multiple trigger points like manual buttons and whatever.
Mm.
And then all these operations, they can talk to databases, they can transform JSON, they can send requests elsewhere, etc. So it becomes, there's quite a lot of hidden food guns in that as well, where it's like if you configure it wrong, all sorts of nasty stuff can happen. So building in all of those safety nets and making sure that you can't really do anything too malicious. If somebody gets access that shouldn't have access and that kind of stuff, you can't really do anything too malicious at first. Is a very important part to the whole thing.
Shall we talk more about? I mean, you can say no. Like this is an area where it's like, how? I mean, how could people break it? Or do we not want to talk about that? I mean, we could not talk about that one, but like, are there any unforeseen points in like the development of flows where you or others just unintentionally took it to past a limit that was not made clear?
Oh, for sure, for sure. Many, 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 many points. It's like because you can respond to things and you can generate new data and you can save new data to the database. So if you're not careful and you have some logical fallacies in what you're putting together, basically,
Mm.
you easily end up with a flow on purpose that sort of just fills up the table, basically, right? Or you
Oh
end up with
yeah.
some sort of recursion or
With
some
like a
sort of
cron, or even just like on a schedule, and it just happens
if you put
very,
a
very regularly.
schedule, every second, and that does a bunch of
Something
stuff. I mean,
significant. Yeah.
you can easily blow it up. So that's also one of the reasons why we put it in settings and not in sort of the user side of the app. So it's like if you compare it to
Oh,
dashboards, for
interesting.
example, for insights, that is on the user side of things because all
I've
of
always
those
wondered
panels,
this. I've
yeah, all of
wondered
those
why it's
panels
there.
are meant to be read only mostly. We have some, you can interact, but those are fairly read only, fairly harmless in that sense. But a flow, you can do some fairly destructive things on purpose because we want to be able to unlock that power. So we gotta allow you to do it. But it does mean that you got to be careful with what you unlock. So definitely
We,
challenges there, and challenges that we're also still solving. Right, we still have every now and again where somebody finds an angle that it's like, oh, but if you accidentally configure it like this, there is still a non-zero chance, that something nefarious happens.
Interesting. What about maintenance for flows? I'm interested because this feels like a feature that, like, yeah, people can intentionally or unintentionally, like, really break things, and we give them the tools to do it. There's also a hosted environment that we are responsible for.
Mhm.
We can talk or not talk about that, but people could do it to their own instance that they host as well. Does that fall into the scope of maintenance? I don't know. Because there's future developments is we built it as an extension type operation. So, the
So
development side
operations,
feels good.
operations is already an extension type, so
Mm.
that's kind of nice that people can hack around, make their own. Um, I think in terms of maintenance, there is that sort of trade-off between, if you smash in your own window and then say the window's broke, it's like, yeah, well, don't smash it, you know what I mean? But at the same time, we can say that about any sort of software, right? So we also want to
Mm.
make sure that we can build in, a little net in front of the window that if you accidentally throw a hammer, it doesn't break, you know what I mean?
Weird choice of analogy there, but okay, I'll
So
take it.
there's moments that you're just so mad you start throwing hammers. But so when it comes to flows, I mean, there's definitely we can devise we can we can come up with safety nets basically that say like if you find yourself in a situation that you didn't want to be in for whatever reason that might be, accidental configuration, or it was just configured the wrong thing at the wrong time. Figuring out like what sort of safety nets can we put in place to make sure that it doesn't then cause
Yeah.
major issues elsewhere, right? But that is a near infinite amount of things. That is the difficulty when it comes to the maintenance piece, of course. If you're talking about, somebody setting up a cron job is an infinite loop that runs, on a schedule, so it's not a problem. But if you have a flow that fires, 60 times a replicant session, we might consider it to be like, oh, that's probably not what it wants to do, right?
On
So it's like,
on this, there's an interesting other side of it, which is in the development of it from the beginning to the end. Were there any interesting points where you're like, I, it can't work like this, or was
oh,
it all pretty? Yeah, I'm kind of curious. Like, what were
hmm.
they?
We had there was one point in time where triggers were not a configurable thing. It was just events, right? So it was just a regular event. But we fairly quickly realized like, oh, but having the ability to basically make a custom endpoint with this, how is that different from making a hook? So if you have an endpoint that triggers a flow, right, that would be insanely powerful because then a third-party service can talk to Directus instead of the other way around. And that
Yes.
was, but that then needs to, redesign basically the whole thing to figure out like where does the data come from, how do you inject it within all these other touch points, that sort of thing. And I think another big one was figuring out, and I think this might be one of the questions that you were hinting at before, is like figuring out how do these operations interact with sort of the data passing through
Yes.
this flow, right? This data pipeline or whatever you want to call it. That was also a very big challenge in trying to figure out like, hey, ta-da.
Oh, I don't. Oh, that's good. Just so you know, so the roots are only revealed at the end, and they get added to your score at the end. Sorry, I should have
Oh,
said
in
that.
that case,
So there is an unknown number of points that I will gain or lose, and an unknown number of points you will gain or lose, and we'll only discover that at the end. This game also,
spoiler
now that we're
alert.
getting into it, you can be like, I can place trains because I can clearly see you're trying to go from A to B, and I'm gonna nab that one, so you can't, right? Which we haven't done much. Yeah, I've played nice in case I lose. Um, Next question. Also, this timer didn't work as I expected. It's like a chess timer. It only goes down when it's your turn.
Oh,
Yeah, so
you're
the 45 minutes is 45 minutes each. But really, you have 9 trains and I have 16. And I think the end game gets triggered when there's like, when you have 3 or fewer or 2 or fewer. So, like, we're nearing the end game anyway. And I've picked up way too many routes. Like, I'm screwed. Anyway, next question, how do we deem a release ready? We have a release cadence. Maybe we can briefly talk about like what our target cadence is in different environments. And
yep.
how and
Yep.
when do we diverge from that? Because we're at the time of recording, this is the world we live in. We've diverged from what we hoped our cadence would be, and I just
Sorry.
want to talk about it.
Yeah, it's an incredibly good question. It's an incredibly good question. So uh, to co-answer that question, I think a little bit of a history lesson is required. And in the very very early days when it was just being built, there were no releases, right? You just push code up to GitHub. People sort of see it, they sort of touch it, they sort of use it, maybe not, right? No hard feelings. It's just goals. And then at a certain point, we were like, okay, it's getting to a point where it's like about ready to actually use, and you do alpha releases, and beta releases, and release candidates and stuff like that. Um, for those following along for a long time, we've done quite a long release candidate phase in the early days because it was just like more and more features we were adding, just having fun with it. So for a very long time, we tried to do weekly releases in those days with the RCs because there were just so many new features and stuff. That having that tight feedback loop was incredibly important at that time. And we also noticed that people weren't upgrading at all unless we called it, a release, which is just
Interesting.
part of the
Yeah.
course. But that also meant that, over time, when it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, we had a point where it was like, all right, now people are really relying on this thing for very mission critical use cases. So we got to make sure that whenever we do put out a release, it's good enough, right? Because the downside with doing very fast releases like that is that it's easier to sneak in a regression that you didn't catch yet because you didn't give it QA time. So we tried doing like a 2-week release cycle for a little while after that. That hit a decent middle ground at a point, although it was still kind of iffy, in that it was just, it was a similar problem where it's like we were trying to include too big of new features, and then you just trying to push it out a little too fast. And now we started to say, okay, now we have so many projects relying on it now. We just really want to make sure that every release is as good as can be. So we're trying to do a monthly release cadence, roughly, right? When it comes to diverging from those releases, it could have multiple reasons. It could be that we're very close to including a piece that we'd like people to get their hands on rather than having to wait for another month. Sometimes that includes, security patches, or that includes other bugs that came in right before the release was scheduled to go out, where we're like, oh, this is actually such a, important tweak. Let's try to get it out still. And sometimes it's also, pure, a resourcing problem where every now and again it's kind of related to that, where you run into, you do it during the final QA steps. It's like you run into one major issue that wasn't known before. You just have to go back to the drawing board for a minute to resolve that before, you find yourself releasing something that is very broken.
My serious face is because you screwed me a couple of turns ago, and I'm just thinking about how I can. Oh, okay. I am listening, but oh, dude, why? Okay, all right. One moment, please. You can keep talking. I'm not listening for a moment. You know what? I'll throw you the next question, and I just need to think about this. I'm mad now. Okay, this next, was that what you wanted to say about releases? I think this covers. I think this covers the.
I think so.
I was listening.
Yeah.
I think that. Yeah, I think that covers it. Because also, like, if you're expecting people to only upgrade their own software once a month, for example, and you haven't managed to squeeze in something that's critical, like a security patch or whatever, or we've spotted an important regression and need to fix it, you can't expect people to be doing that that upgrade more often than we set out, less often than we set out maybe, but definitely not more often as an expectation. So yeah, sometimes delaying it is better. Next question we have is around new database type support. So right now, Directus supports SQL databases. And we've spoken about in exploration in the roadmap, wanting to support other types of databases, not SQL databases. I think we specifically called out NoSQL databases. Now, there's a whole bunch of questions here. I'm going to do them one at a time. The first one I'm going to ask is just, can you talk a bit about what the process of, or what you believe the process of supporting other database types looks like? And Directus is ultimately at its core a database abstraction. And you take away all the nice words we say. I mean, it's more, but at its real core, it's a database abstraction. So maybe talking a little bit about that abstraction, how it was built or thought about, would be good.
Yeah. So I think one thing to sort of set the stage correctly here, when we're talking about supporting other databases, one thing that I find very important in the context of Directus is that we say support the database, because we're talking about different database types, right? In this particular case, because you're talking about NoSQL, like document databases, that sort of thing. I think it's important to sort of highlight what supporting even means in that case, because you do see a lot of tools in software engineering and development where they basically abstract away a document database, but then treat it like relational databases still. You know what I mean? Whereas to me, at least, the power of a document database is not that it's relational, because it's not, right? And that's on purpose. Like, there's a lot of pros that you can find in document databases that you can't find in relational databases. So if you treat them both as the same thing, you're basically just wasting effort at that point, right? It's a bit of a hot take, but you're misusing what they're good at and what they're meant for. So I hope I didn't block you too much for that one. So that I think is an important starting point where it's like, oh boy.
It's just popped up on my
Maybe that's
screen
it.
and says you have 2 cars or less. It is now the last turn. We each get 1 more turn.
Good luck.
Do one. Okay. Sorry, boss. No, not really. Do one for real. Please continue.
So with that in mind, before when we started, the previous iterations of Directus used to be MySQL, MySQL 5 only, and then the first iteration of sort of what's sort of the current iteration, basically, current life cycle. That was designed with the idea around, SQL is a common-ish, there's some deviations, but SQL is a fairly common language in that it's a standard. One train.
One train.
So,
hang on.
Oh, pause that thought.
Is this me? This is me. Okay, so I got that one, and I got that one.
I'm seeing my own.
You're seeing your own.
One?
No, this is still me.
Oh, that's yours.
You've got a different version of the animation. Okay. So we'll watch and then we'll discuss. Yeah, that one was the one you screwed. No, it wasn't that one. You screwed a few. Oh my gosh, that's a long path. I didn't see it. Oh my gosh. Right, I do actually track board games on my phone. So at the end of this, I'll just take a screenshot. I'm recording it. So yeah.
Does that mean what?
Oh my god. Oh my god. And I need to just express, I did not give that to you. I was trying to win.
Good.
Right, yeah, so we're almost at the end of this. Almost at the end of this chat. Okay, yeah, database abstractions. Go on. Say your piece.
Don't talk about it now. 123 to 52. All right.
It's good. That is an exceptional score. That was good. I didn't even see how long that path was getting. Wow. Wow. In that last turn, by the way, if you're feeling a little risky, if you think you're doing good otherwise, and you only have that one train left, you can get 1 point, or you can draw 3 new routes on the hope that you have already completed one.
Oh, that feels tricky.
Yeah, which is what I did. And then I didn't get, and then I couldn't do any, so I just took the lowest score one to lose the lowest score. Anyway, yeah.
Risky business. What was this thing? Yeah. So okay. Yeah. So we were then saying, coming out of MySQL and relational databases, Directus is designed around relational data, and like you have tables with relationships. You manage individual items. It's around structured data, and that's on purpose. I mean, it's called Directus. It's all around structured data. So, for this sort of iteration, we were like, okay, let's make sure that it's a little more agnostic in that it do any of the relational databases instead of just MySQL, right? So we did that by building it around, a database abstraction, a SQL abstraction layer within the API that sort of converts everything down to regular SQL first, and then executes it into specific flavors for all of these databases. So if we're talking about supporting like MongoDB, the question to me really becomes like, well, first of all, what does a document database even look like within Directus? Because you're not really talking about columns and tables anymore. You're talking about.
I've not even thought about. I'm thinking about like the, what do you call it? The data engine, I suppose, like the underlying infrastructure. But this whole UI is built like in this moment. I have really appreciated the whole UI is based around a relational data store with structured data that you configure and then you populate and run CRUD operations against. Wow.
So to me, really supporting MongoDB or any other document-based database, it's a way bigger question around what even is that experience? Like, what do the API endpoints look like? Because like in a relational database, its strength is sort of the ability to query and filter and sort.
Could you run versions? Could you have like a? I mean, this feels like it would. I don't think this is the path. You could run like a Directus for NoSQL, and that's a different version. But that just doesn't track. I mean, that is a path.
It could be, could be a path. And then, the other question is then under the hood, now that our whole data pipeline is sort of architected around this idea of like going to SQL and then back out to the vendors, like how do you get document databases into the mix, right? Are
Mm-hmm.
you trying to make a whole secondary flow just for databases? Like we've seen some other projects do something similar, and then they scrap it after the fact because maintenance. Or do we try to abstract it as if it was relational and then divert at the last moment, or what do we make that look like, technically speaking? And then what is the type of support that we want to give? And by support, I mean, what do we want to, what sort of functionalities of a document database are the important bits why you would choose a document database in the first place?
Yes.
Before, a lot of times when we got the feature requests coming in, like, oh, you should support MongoDB, it was oftentimes from a sort of, it's a popular thing nowadays, so let me use it within Directus without really thinking about what does that actually mean when you're using it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're really focusing now on trying to figure out what that looks like, as in how do you combine it? How can we maybe offer the best of both? How can we maybe do what you just mentioned, where you just have a dedicated, Directus for document, Directus for relationships? There's various ways to do
I
that.
suppose part of this is like, this is not my skill. Like, I don't know the answer to this. I'm sure I know it's written up and in loads of places, but like, what are the strengths in a document database? Why, as you say, why would someone choose that? They might just be choosing it because it is easy to pick up. The docs are good. It's what your mates are using. It's what you're taught. It's what you first learn, and you just roll with it. Because for many use cases, it's kind of irrelevant. You just throw data in, slightly different, mechanisms. You grab data out, and so on. But in the real, you're making a choice for a
Yeah,
reason. And yeah,
yeah.
how do you enable those characteristics? Let's call them. Interesting. I mean, you've alluded to this, but just to be explicit, where are we at with this? It's somewhere in the future on the roadmap as we've published it, but where is it at today?
Yeah, so right now we're both in the implementation stage of like what does that abstraction actually looks like, and how can we, offer the functionalities and sort of what you sort of used to see now in the API for relational data. How do we do a similar thing for document data and specific vendors and do that? Because we do want to also make sure that it's not MongoDB support. We want to make sure that it's document database support, one of which is MongoDB, right? Because at
Yeah.
the end of the day, the vendors all have their strengths and pros and cons as well, of course. But it's about the concept of what a document is at that point, no
Well,
longer.
we are unopinionated by nature. That is how all of this is built. So it wouldn't be true to form at the very least
Right.
to not do that with this body of work.
Yeah.
So I have one more like question than the ones that we kind of spoke about before we started recording. But given that there's work or exploration, experimentation, research, whatever you want to call it, around changing the database abstraction to be more general across database types, is it then fair to, and this was the community question, I will actually read it verbatim, right? Given that we're looking at NoSQL databases specifically as published, do we also then plan on supporting graph DBs? And now this is me again. I suppose then other kinds of databases.
Yeah. So I think it's a great question, and the honest answer is once we sort of figure out how relational and document sort of live and breathe and work together, we can also figure out what is a third or a fourth or a fifth, because the difficulty now is figuring out how to have that sort of
Two different kind of
within
paradigms
it's
coexisting. Once
yeah,
you've nailed that,
coexist.
what's a third?
But
Well, yeah, whip it
yeah,
up tomorrow, mate. Yeah.
once we figure out that puzzle piece, it becomes way more realistic to then also look further across and be like, oh, so what if we want to do graph databases then, right? But I think the same question then starts basically from the start, where it's like, what does the user experience look like for a graph,
Why am I
right?
using this in the first place? What characteristics am
What
I
is
trying to make sure? Yeah, because we wouldn't. I mean, I assume we wouldn't just launch something in an API and be like, "We're done." It's a database abstraction. Have fun, but it's what's critical is we also provide Data Studio, this web application. So the experience has to work for people who aren't writing code to interact with data as well. We're almost at the time we'd put aside for this. So I'm going to throw one more question in there, which is like, might this bit fail? could it just fail out? Like, what does failure look like? Would that be an acceptable outcome here? Like, is this a thing that like we will achieve that? Like in your mind, you see this as being like we will achieve this feature eventually, or might you just reach a
Yeah.
point of going, it's not
So
worth the effort, or I can't, or
for
I we can't figure it out.
a lot of new features, so I do believe, and me and with me the engineering team, there is no such thing as impossible. There is, however, such a thing as time constraint.
Hmm. Hmm.
Where if we just know that building a thing like this is just going to take way too much time, and what it then gives us is not, it doesn't balance, the circle back to the balancing question, it doesn't balance the time investment required to get there. It will be shelved or just paused until further notice, or maybe we reduce the scope of the MVP to figure out, like, okay, what is a lighter version of the same thing that we can start
Hmm.
with and then improve over time. So I think that is a tactic that we've done many times in the past, where also a large part of extensions comes from as well, by the way, because with dashboards, we were like, okay, the concept of dashboards is great, but to make it really insane, you got to have, a ton of different types of those panels. What is one way to reduce the scope to get it out and get people using it and exploring it is by saying, oh, we allow the toolkit to make custom panels, and therefore we can ship with a reduced set to start with.
Yes. Yes.
People can start using the core, the important bits to have, the critical mass first, and then keep improving over time, right? So that is definitely one of the ways to do that. Is there a failure point? Yes. Features also get shelved. There's also feature requests that we are very legitimately excited about, but we just don't know what the solution is yet. And for those, we just let them sit for a little while. Oftentimes, we discuss it and kind of just let it simmer in the back of our brains. That's kind of what we call it. Or sometimes, we have it as a feature request on GitHub and we just wait for community input, honestly. Like one of the threads that I love to pull up every now and again is the one around like content versioning, like future revisions. How do you save an
A
item that's
draft
not
or
done
something.
yet as a draft
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
database? Because you want to save it somewhere, but then you're also talking about a deeply relationally nested database structure. And then do you make a copy of the whole database? Well, that's surely not something that you want to be doing. How do you store the changes? So there's a lot of discussion.
Oh,
And then
we've come full circle. I think it's just lodged in my brain. You don't have to talk about this, but like we spoke about partial schema updates.
Mhm.
You could apply the same, like that logic feels like it could also exist for content, but um,
Potentially. Yeah. So I think that was a great example of a feature that we've gotten really excited about in the past. And we're like, oh, we need to totally do that. To only then realize that it's like, well, hold on a minute. We just don't know what the right option is. Like we all have our assumptions and we all have, various ways to potentially implement it. And then, we basically just put it out and just wait for feedback and ask for feedback, right? Where it's like,
yeah,
how
yeah,
would
yeah.
you do it from scratch? And then how can we sort of apply that? Yeah.
Fantastic. I think that brings us to the end of our time. We didn't get to a
Yeah.
question, but you know what? We always have next month. So, reminder to those of you who have somehow stayed till now, probably on 2 times speed. Wonder what we sound like at 2 times speed. Um, you can ask questions anytime. Come to our Discord, directus.chat in your browser. We'll take you to the Discord invite. Um, you can ask your question in the thread in GitHub discussions. You can fill in the form which we've linked in GitHub discussions as well if you want to remain anonymous and ask your question. All good. And we will keep doing it. I've had a really fun time. I didn't like losing by literally, like, you literally won by like double the points. But how did you find Ticket to Ride?
I like it. I like it.
Yeah, I
It's
like
actually
it
fun.
too. Yeah, it's fun when you win, isn't it? There's extra mechanics in like some of the expansions, like the Europe expansion has like train stations that give you certain abilities. Certain versions have like passengers in the trains, but this is the original Ticket to Ride, and yeah, I like it. I like it, and I like this kind of port of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now you own it.
I'll be playing it every night now.
Well, oh, yeah, yeah. Well, there's going to be a rematch. Is maybe not the next time, but there will be a rematch here, and I will wipe the floor with you. I'm
Bring it on.
My partner Amy does comment that I am a very sore loser, and I'm normally I'm not a sore loser, but in this exact moment, I see exactly what they
Mm.
mean.
Maybe it wasn't so good a day to do video games then, is it?
Anyway, on that note, bye everyone.
Bye bye. Better luck next time.